A newborn abandoned in an airport bathroom. A canine dog refuses to leave the stall, and what he discovers sets off a chain of events no one could have predicted. From a missing embryo to a mother who never knew she was pregnant, this is a true-to-life story of loss, deception, and reunion. As the layers unfold, one question remains: how did it all go so wrong and yet end in something so right? Like, subscribe, and follow this incredible journey that proves even in the darkest corners, hope can still be found. The morning rush at JFK Airport was as chaotic as ever. Flight announcements crackled through intercoms, rolling suitcases thudded along the polished floor, and the ever-present scent of coffee hung in the air like a veil. Among the swirl of passengers, a noise officer, Reyes, walked steadily beside Shadow. His trusted canine partner, a 4-year-old German shepherd, trained to detect explosives, narcotics, and more recently distressed human scent patterns. Shadow was calm and methodical, much like Reyes himself. Neither was prone to overreaction. They had been working together for almost 2 years now, and in all that time Reyes had learned to read every flick of the dog's ear, every tightening of his posture. Shadow didn't bark unless it meant something. He didn't react unless it mattered. That was why, when Shadow suddenly stopped outside the women's restroom near Terminal 4, Reyes felt a chill slide beneath his uniform. Shadow lowered his body nose, twitching rapidly, tail stiff. He emitted a low, continuous growl, not aggressive, but urgent. Reyes narrowed his eyes. "What is it, boy?" he asked, under his breath, hand already moving to rest casually near his belt radio. Passers-by moved around them, some glancing at the poised animal. Others, too, absorbed in their phones or travel schedules to notice. Shadow advanced a half-step toward one of the stalls, then halted again, nose pointing to the third door from the left. He didn't bark. He simply waited tense. Something was wrong. Reyes tapped the earpiece clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is K927. I've got a positive alert at Terminal 4 women's restroom. Requesting assistance and female personnel for entry." There was a short pause, then copy that, K927. "Units en route. Hold position." Shadow's nose was now pressed to the seam at the bottom of the stall door. He scratched once, then sat back on his haunches, staring at it like it owed him an explanation. Reyes scanned the hallway for any sign of panic, but everything continued in its usual state of barely organized chaos. 3 minutes later, Officer Janice Kim arrived, uniform crisp despite the sweat already forming at her temple. "What do we got?" she asked, eyeing the still-poised Shadow. He alerted on that stall. No chemicals, no explosive trace. But he's holding the position. I've never seen him act like this. Kim nodded, knocked lightly on the stall door. "Airport police. Is anyone in there?" No response. She waited, knocked again, then tried the door. It was unlocked. The door creaked open. Inside, the stall was unoccupied almost. On top of the closed toilet lid was a small travel tote, nondescript, blue and beige canvas. One of the shoulder straps had a faint red smudge. Kim reached for the bag cautiously as if expecting something to spring out. But then there it was. Faint, fragile, a sound, a tiny whimper. Both officers froze. Shadow stood and let out a short bark as if confirming what they already knew but couldn't process. Kim unzipped the bag with trembling fingers, her breath caught. Inside, swaddled in a faded gray hoodie, was a baby, a newborn. The tiny face was red damp with sweat, the chest barely moved. The infant's skin was pale blue tinged around the lips. "Oh my God," Kim breathed. She scooped the child gently into her arms, pressing 2 fingers to the side of the baby's neck. "Pulse is weak, barely there. Get EMS, now." Reyes was already on it. "Dispatch medical emergency. Infant found non-responsive but breathing. Terminal 4, women's restroom. We need paramedics now." People were starting to gather, first curious, then alarmed as Reyes shooed them back and stretched yellow tape across the restroom entrance. Shadow paced in circles, barking softly, tail flicking side to side in a strange rhythm. Not agitated. Not defensive. As if he sensed something more fragile than danger. As if he knew that whatever had happened here wasn't criminal in the usual way, it was desperate. By the time the paramedics arrived, the baby had started to cry, a thin, reedy sound, but sound nonetheless. Kim cradled the child, closer voice low and rhythmic. "You're okay, little one. You're okay." The medic took over, quickly checking vitals and oxygen levels. Still alive. "Cold, dehydrated, but responsive," he said, glancing up at the officers with an expression halfway between shock and awe. "I don't understand," Kim murmured, her eyes lingering on the empty stall. "Why leave a baby here in a restroom? At an airport? Why now?" Reyes added. Shadow let out a low huff. They would later review hours of security footage. They would canvass the terminal. But for now, as the paramedics whisked the infant toward a waiting ambulance and the crowd dispersed under the quiet murmur of shock and sympathy, there was only one thing clear: the baby was still alive. And if not for Shadow, he might not have been. The ambulance tore through Queens traffic with lights flashing and sirens muted, escorted by 2 patrol cars. Inside, Officer Kim sat quietly beside the incubator, her gloves still sticky with the faint residue of dried blood and antiseptic from the emergency field care. The baby, now identified as female, was wrapped in fresh linen and hooked to a nasal cannula, her tiny frame almost disappearing within the plastic shell. Kim kept watching the rise and fall of her chest, as if one missed breath would mean the difference between survival and another quiet obituary on page 12. At Elmhurst Hospital's neonatal intensive care unit, the transfer was swift. A team of nurses and 1 pediatrician were already waiting, alerted in advance by dispatch. Core temperatures at 94.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And dropping one nurse said urgently, "We've got less than 5 minutes to stabilize." Doctor. Eliza Monroe, a 42-year-old neonatologist with 10 years of combat zone experience in Doctors Without Borders, stepped forward without hesitation. "Let's go. Heat pad on level 2, IV glucose push, and I want labs on CBC, CRP, and tox screen within the hour." She turned briefly to Kim. "You were the first responder." Kim nodded. "She was found in a public restroom at JFK. No ID, no blanket, just a hoodie. She's lucky to be alive," Monroe muttered, checking the baby's pupils with a penlight. "A little longer, and she would have slipped into hypothermia so deep we might not have gotten her back." In another room, Officer Reyes stood near a wall-mounted monitor in the airport security office. On screen, grainy footage scrolled back and fast-forward, people entering and leaving Terminal 4, janitors pushing carts, travelers dragging strollers. But something was wrong. When Reyes tried to rewind to the exact timestamp of 8:42 a.m., the estimated time the baby was left, nothing showed. "It jumps," he said aloud. "Why the hell does it jump?" Beside him, a tech supervisor clicked through menus, frustration on her face. "This shouldn't happen. We have overlapping feeds for this entire corridor. But look, there's a 6-minute gap. No error message, no interruption alert. Just clean jump." Reyes stared at the timeline. 8:41:57. Skip. 8:48:02. Where's the footage? Don't know. It's not just that stall. The entire block of cameras along that row restroom corridor, janitor's entrance, even the luggage carousel gone. Just those 6 minutes. Just so happens to be the 6 minutes when a newborn got abandoned and nearly died, Reyes muttered. He looked down at Shadow, who sat quietly at his feet. "You saw something no one else could, didn't you?" Shadow's ears twitched. "Pull any nearby angles," Reyes ordered. Hallways, exits. See if anyone suspicious was near the restroom before or after the blackout. The technician nodded, already tapping. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Monroe glanced at the vital monitor and gave a tight nod. Her core's coming up, pulses stabilizing. She's not out of the woods yet, but she's fighting. "Do you think she'll make it?" Kim asked softly. Monroe looked over. "Babies like her, abandoned at birth, cold underfed, they don't all make it. But this one, she's got a hell of a will to live." "You know," Kim said slowly, "if that dog hadn't insisted something was wrong, she'd probably be in a body bag by now." "Then I'd say that dog earned himself a medal," Monroe said. "And maybe a name plaque in this wing." At JFK, Officer Reyes finally found something. At 8:40 a.m., just before the blackout, one external camera picked up a blurred image of a woman walking briskly toward the terminal, her posture slightly hunched as if in pain. She wore a long gray coat, dark leggings, and a ball cap pulled low. Her face wasn't visible. In one hand, she clutched a canvas tote, blue and beige. Reyes hit pause. It was the same bag. The tech frowned. This one shouldn't even be active. It's from the taxi line, barely in frame. But it caught her, Reyes said. Can we track her back, trace her approach? Not easily. She came from the short-term lot no license plate caught. If I had to guess, she walked from drop-off, probably knew the camera angles. So, this wasn't just panic, Reyes murmured. It was deliberate. Timed. 6-minute blackout, total anonymity. He stared at the screen. She didn't just abandon the baby. She disappeared. At Elmhurst, the infant's breathing had evened out. A nurse wrote Jane Doe Terminal 4 on the ID tag. Dr. Monroe watched the line of the ECG flatten into calm regularity. Someone out there carried this baby for 9 months, she said to Kim, and then left her to die. But didn't quite let her. Kim frowned. What do you mean? She left her in a restroom, sure, but not in a dumpster. Not outside, not hidden somewhere no one would ever go. She wrapped her in a hoodie. She left her somewhere a dog might smell her. That's not care, Kim said sharply. That's desperation. Monroe didn't argue. Sometimes they overlap. That afternoon, Reyes uploaded the footage of the hooded woman into facial recognition. The system took hours. Matches came back inconclusive. No registered ID, no clear angle. Nothing to go on but posture and that bag. Somewhere in another district, a dispatcher logged the Jane Doe report under suspicious circumstances, child endangerment. The system assigned a temporary case number, flagged it for social services, and passed it on. But none of them yet knew that this wasn't just about a baby in a bathroom. None of them knew how far this would reach. And none of them knew how carefully that 6-minute window had been chosen. How surgically clean the disappearance had been. How familiar it would soon feel. Because somewhere, someone was watching the news from JFK eyes flicking to the screen, just as the baby's swaddled photo appeared. A hand reached for the remote but paused. Officer Reyes was reviewing terminal surveillance again, this time with a broader scope. The 6-minute blackout had become more than a technical anomaly. It was now the most suspicious element of an already disturbing case. His attention narrowed on a new report filed late from a janitorial staffer. Reyes met with her in the employee break room, a place littered with vending machines and bulletin boards half covered in outdated safety posters. The woman, Maria Alvarez, wore a faded green uniform and had tired eyes that spoke of too many early shifts and not enough help. She clutched a paper cup of coffee with both hands as if for warmth. "Tell me what you remember," Reyes asked, keeping his voice steady. "This was yesterday morning, right around the time our alert came in." Maria nodded slowly. "Yeah. I was finishing up cleaning the family restroom down the hall when I saw her. A young woman, maybe mid-20s. Long dark hair pulled into a low bun. She was coming out of the women's restroom holding her side like she was in pain. I noticed her because she didn't walk like most travelers. It wasn't just tired, she looked hollow." "What do you mean?" "Like something had just drained out of her," Maria said quietly. She was hunched forward, arms wrapped across her stomach like she'd been punched. I asked if she was okay just out of instinct. You know, she didn't answer. Didn't even look at me. Just walked fast toward the exit like she needed to disappear. What time was this? Maybe 20 minutes to 9, I remember, because I had my music on and the 8:30 track was just ending. I looked at my phone to skip the ad. Reyes scribbled the details. That put the woman leaving the restroom roughly 40 minutes before the baby was discovered, well within the likely window for when the child had been left. Did you notice anything else? What she was wearing, gray coat? Cheap fabric, something thin, no scarf, no gloves, and she looked cold. She had a tote bag canvas, I think, blue with beige straps. That matched. Reyes showed her the blurry still frame they had from the exterior camera near the taxi drop. Maria leaned in, eyes narrowing. That's her, definitely. Same way she moved. Same coat? Reyes thanked her, took a copy of her statement, and headed back to the security office. Now they had two threads, the image and the eyewitness. He fed the still frame into the DMV and state database search with gait analysis enhancement, then added it to their facial recognition queue again this time, cross-referencing missing persons and interstate medical records where permitted. It was a long shot, but the system flagged a soft match 2 hours later. Name Marissa Tran. Age 26. Residence Albany, New York. No criminal record. No known employment. Most notably, she had once been registered in a state-supported women's health program under a provisional Medicaid entry. The flagged note on the file caught Reyes's eye. Voluntary pregnancy termination request. Incomplete status canceled. Date 9 months ago, almost to the day. Curious, Reyes pulled the file further. It had been signed at a clinic called Hudson Women's Care. The medical request had been submitted, reviewed, and scheduled, then abruptly canceled. The only notation in the system was patient did not return for final intake. There was no update after that. Reyes frowned. That meant Marissa had been pregnant but hadn't gone through with the abortion. No adoption paperwork, no birth record in her name, and now a newborn was found in an airport bathroom wrapped in a hoodie, nearly dead from exposure. He brought the discovery to Officer Kim, who was still in touch with the hospital. Jane Doe's tox screen came back clean, she said. No alcohol, no opiates, no neonatal withdrawal. And get this, she was born less than 4 hours before you guys found her. Umbilical cord was clamped by hand, no hospital tag, no record of birth. Which means, wherever she was born, it wasn't with medical help. She was delivered somewhere private, Reyes said. Maybe a motel, a bathroom stall, a parked car. And the mother was hurting. Maria said she was hunched over, walking like she'd been hit in the gut. Kim looked unsettled. She might have gone through the whole labor by herself, and then dumped the baby like trash, Reyes said, but the anger in his voice was sharper than he expected. Kim paused. Not everyone who gives up a baby does it with malice. Sometimes people break in ways that don't look like breaking from the outside. Reyes didn't answer. He turned the screen back to Marissa Tran's file. The photograph was old college ID, maybe. Round face, tired smile. Something about the eyes felt off even then. He pulled up her last known address and checked for recent activity. Nothing in the last 3 months. No credit card use, no cell tower pings, no employment verification. Like she'd ghosted herself. Or someone had helped her vanish. He sent a formal request to Albany PD for a welfare check. At the same time, he notified DHS about a possible child endangerment case crossing state lines. If Marissa had traveled from Albany to JFK, she'd needed transport train bus or ride share, and if she'd timed her arrival for maximum anonymity, someone had helped her plan it. The unsettling part wasn't just that Marissa Tran had likely given birth in secret. It was that she'd made every effort to leave no trace. Except she had. Shadow had found that trace sniffed it out from under a metal door in the world's busiest airport. A faint chemical echo of sweat, blood, and skin that no machine would have caught in time. Reyes stared at the photo again. The system couldn't confirm the match, not conclusively, but his gut was rarely wrong. He printed out the image and pinned it to the whiteboard in the conference room. Red marker circled the name Marissa Tran. Underneath, he scribbled one word in block letters, Why? 3 days after the discovery at JFK, the baby, still officially unnamed, was gaining weight slowly under the care of Dr. Eliza Monroe and her NICU team. Her condition had stabilized enough that the social services initiated the usual procedures, including a DNA submission to CODIS and NDIS databases. It was standard in cases involving abandoned infants, partly for identification, partly to flag any repeat patterns in known at-risk families. Reyes met with Dr. Monroe in the hospital's corridor outside the NICU. We're running out of time before the state assigns foster placement, she told him. Even with you flagging this case as unusual, the system keeps moving. If no ID surfaces by the end of the week, the county steps in. Reyes nodded, then added, We've already sent her DNA to forensics. If there's a match, we'll know soon. He didn't mention that he had also forwarded the photo of Marissa Tran to Missing Persons and DHS Child Welfare Task Force. Nothing definitive had come back. No sign of her in Albany. No registered activity since February. It was like she had never existed beyond the digital traces she left behind 9 months ago. 2 more days passed. Then the call came. The voice on the other end was from a senior technician at the New York State Forensic Lab. We got the CODIS results back on the JFK infant. She began no small talk. No direct match in the National Criminal or Kinship Database. So, she's not related to anyone flagged in law enforcement systems, Reyes clarified. That's correct, but there's something else unusual. He paused. Go on. While she doesn't match any current entries, her DNA shows a partial kinship similarity, extremely close though not direct, with a record from a non-criminal sample, one that entered our system as part of a civil legal action tied to a fertility dispute. Reyes frowned. You're telling me the baby matches someone who sued a fertility clinic. Not a full match, the tech corrected, but strong enough to suggest biological relationship. Siblings, or more likely parents. The file was uploaded during a civil proceeding 8 years ago. The plaintiffs' names were Olivia and Daniel Pierce. They lived in Rochester, Minnesota at the time. Filed a formal complaint against a clinic called Hope Fertility after a batch of embryos was declared non-viable. They requested DNA preservation at the time, citing a desire for future legal verification. That's how the sample entered the state database. Reyes blinked the wheels in his head starting to turn. So, the baby doesn't match anyone in law enforcement, but she might be the biological child of this couple. It's highly probable. I can send you the legal summary and the genetic overlap data. It's one of the closest partials I've ever seen outside immediate kin. Do they know? Not unless you tell them, she said. That case was never criminal. Their entry was for civil dispute only. No red flags, no alerts. Reyes requested the full file, thanked her, and hung up. He leaned back in his chair, absorbing the implications. A baby left in an airport bathroom matches the stored genetic record of a couple from across the country who, as far as the state knows, never had a successful IVF outcome. He pulled the Hope fertility case summary. The details were dry clinical but damning. The Pierces had undergone IVF in 2017. 4 embryos were created, only one of which was deemed viable at the time. The clinic claimed that the remaining embryos had failed to progress past day 3 and that the sole viable embryo had not resulted in a successful pregnancy. Olivia and Daniel disputed this, citing poor communication and suspected mismanagement. They filed a complaint but lost due to lack of concrete evidence and the protective legal framework around assisted reproductive technology. Hope Fertility quietly shut down 2 years later after unrelated malpractice claims. There was no direct link between that closure and the Pierce case until now. Reyes printed a current address listing for Olivia and Daniel Pierce. They had since moved to Minneapolis. Records showed where Daniel worked as an electrical engineer for a solar energy company, and Olivia managed a small nonprofit focused on women's health. Reyes hesitated, then made the call. Olivia answered. Her voice was calm, clear, but weary. "Hello, Mrs. Pierce Reyes," began. "My name is Officer Luis Reyes. I'm calling from the New York City Police Department regarding a matter that may be connected to a civil filing you and your husband made several years ago." Silence. Then cautiously, "What kind of matter? It concerns a possible biological connection between you and an unidentified infant found in our jurisdiction." Her voice sharpened. "What do you mean, found? A newborn girl was discovered at JFK Airport in a public restroom. We recovered her in critical condition, but she's stable now. Her DNA doesn't match anyone in our direct systems, but does partially align with yours." The line was dead quiet. Then Olivia said, "That's not possible. We never had children." "I understand this is difficult," Reyes said gently, "but I'm sending you a secured link to review the preliminary lab match and the baby's information. You and your husband can choose whether to pursue further confirmation." He could hear her breathing shift unsteady. This can't be right. We're not accusing anyone of anything," Reyes added. But if your genetic material was used without consent, we'll need to investigate how and when." He sent the encrypted documents, then sat at his desk, staring at the muted TV in the corner. News anchors were still covering the miracle infant at JFK, most without the full truth. He knew what was coming next would raise more questions than answers. And he knew deep down that someone had deliberately used an embryo that wasn't theirs. The video call connected just after dusk. Olivia and Daniel Pierce sat side by side at their kitchen table in a modest suburban home outside Minneapolis. A small ceramic lamp cast warm light on the backsplash of their open-plan kitchen, but the atmosphere in the room was anything but cozy. Daniel's jaw was locked, his hands clasped together on the table. Olivia leaned forward, slightly, the corners of her mouth tight with something between fear and disbelief. On the screen, Officer Reyes tried to speak evenly. "I know this is a lot to absorb," he began. "The initial DNA analysis indicates a 99.7% likelihood that the baby found at JFK is biologically yours." Olivia didn't blink. "That's not possible. We never had a child." Reyes nodded slowly. "According to your civil case, you attempted IVF at Hope Fertility in 2017. 4 embryos were created, none of which were viable." Daniel interrupted, his voice flat. "At least that's what they told us. We did 2 rounds. The first failed during transfer. The second time, we were told the embryos didn't develop properly. They offered to refund a partial fee. Olivia cried in that parking lot for 45 minutes. That was the end of it." "You didn't try again?" Reyes asked gently. "No," Olivia answered. "The process was devastating, financially and emotionally. We agreed we couldn't go through it again. I had minor complications after the second cycle, and our doctor suggested we take time off. That time turned into years. We tried to move on." Reyes hesitated. "Were you ever given lab reports confirming the embryos were non-viable?" Daniel's brow furrowed. "We were given summaries, charts, but not raw data. Honestly, at the time, we didn't even know what to ask for. We were heartbroken. We trusted them." Olivia added, "I asked if we could preserve anything just in case. They said it wasn't possible. They told us our embryos had already degenerated by day 3. There was nothing left to freeze." Reyes took a breath. "The clinic, Hope Fertility, was later investigated for malpractice. I assume you're aware." Daniel's expression hardened. "We heard they shut down. That was it. We figured some other patient had a worse outcome and finally called a lawyer who made something stick. We didn't want to revisit it. The truth is," Reyes said carefully, "they were under suspicion for selling embryos." Both Olivias flinched. "You're saying," Daniel said, voice low, "someone used our embryos without consent." "That's one possibility. We're still piecing it together. But the child found in New York has genetic markers that don't just match the DNA you submitted during the legal dispute. They fall within range for a direct offspring. There's no doubt she's your biological daughter." For a moment, no one spoke. Olivia's eyes glistened. Daniel looked away. "Why now?" he muttered. "Why us?" Reyes leaned forward slightly. "That's what we're trying to find out." After the call ended, Reyes returned to the whiteboard. He drew a new line connecting Baby Doe to the names Olivia and Daniel Pierce with a dotted red arrow. Beneath the couple's names, he wrote Hope Fertility. He then opened the archived investigative files on the clinic. According to the New York Attorney General's office, Hope Fertility was shut down in 2019 after multiple internal whistleblower reports triggered an audit. At least 3 former lab technicians alleged improper storage of embryos, mislabeling of samples, and unsanctioned use of reproductive materials for third-party transfers. Reyes scrolled through court depositions. One particular testimony caught his attention. A former embryologist, J.K., described being asked to make room in the freezer for higher-paying clients by discarding or downgrading embryos from couples who had already disengaged from treatment. When Reyes pulled the official list of all embryo samples in question, including destroyed and transferred items, there were over 60 names logged in records. Yet Olivia and Daniel Pierce were not listed among them, not even as a footnote. No record of their files, their cell samples, their identifiers. It was as if their embryos never existed. Reyes checked again. The intake record from 2017 confirmed receipt of the Pierce embryos, but the lab database uploaded during the state's seizure of files contained no corresponding entry under their code. Someone deleted it, Reyes muttered aloud. He dug deeper. He found that around the same time the Pierces were told their embryos had failed, the clinic received a large order from a partner clinic in upstate New York, an offshoot lab unaffiliated by name, but sharing a supply chain and occasional lab technicians. The records were vague, anonymized under generic donor IDs. But the dates lined up almost perfectly. If someone within Hope Fertility had decided to quietly mark the Pierce embryos as non-viable while transferring them elsewhere, it could have been done without the couple's knowledge. There was no federal oversight strong enough to prevent it at the time. Reyes called Kim. "I need you to request sealed shipping records from Hope Fertility's former storage facility. Anything from 2017 to 2019. Focus on external transfers. You think the embryos were trafficked, I think they were erased. Then moved. That's not just malpractice, Kim said. That's human trafficking. Not legally, but ethically, it's one hell of a gray zone." He paused. "And we haven't even identified who carried the pregnancy yet. We're still missing the middle link, the surrogate," Kim said, "or the vessel. And whoever orchestrated it," Reyes added. The missing link in the chain had a name, and it was still Marissa Tran. Officer Reyes felt the gravity of that fact deepen with each new report that landed on his desk. A background sweep turned up fragments, employment history, medical visits, a brief college transcript, but the full picture remained elusive. She had never officially registered a change of residence or filed a birth certificate. And yet, 9 months after vanishing from public activity, her image appeared walking out of JFK's terminal without a baby, but with the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who had just given birth. Reyes pushed for more information through her previous employer, a mid-size marketing agency in Albany. After 2 rounds of requests and a subpoena threat, they finally released HR logs and internal communication. Marissa had taken a leave of absence, citing personal medical reasons, exactly 9 months and 1 week prior to the date of the infant's discovery. Her supervisor's memo noted that she'd stopped responding to work emails and voicemails for 2 weeks before submitting a generic form with no doctor's note. Then she reappeared almost 3 months later, requesting to return to part-time status, which the company granted. In a follow-up HR note, a colleague wrote, "Marissa looks tired. Different. She's distant. Doesn't talk about what happened. It's like she went somewhere else and came back a stranger. None of the co-workers mentioned pregnancy. No one reported seeing her visibly pregnant. But surveillance of her residence during that period limited, as it was showed fewer comings and goings and several deliveries of groceries and toiletries consistent with someone limiting outside contact." The final nail was her OB/GYN listing. She had listed a doctor named Leonard H. Sloan at a private women's clinic just outside Albany, which Reyes recognized instantly. The name had appeared in old Hope Fertility staffing records. Sloan had once served as a consulting specialist there during the same years the Pierce embryos were handled. Reyes pulled his disciplinary file through the state medical board. It showed 3 warnings and 2 patient complaints over 7 years, all quietly settled. The complaints weren't about competence but ethics concerns over vague consent, language, questionable billing for procedures patients claimed they never authorized. Sloan had never lost his license, but he had quietly resigned from Hope Fertility 6 months before their shutdown. It wasn't hard to imagine why. Reyes sat across from Kim in the precinct conference room, both of them staring at the compiled timeline. "So we have Marissa," Kim said slowly. 9 months ago, she disappears from work. No public medical record of pregnancy. No visible signs based on what co-workers say. Then she quietly gives birth and dumps the baby at JFK. And the doctor she listed as her OB, Reyes added, worked at the same clinic where the Pierce embryos were mismanaged. It's not a coincidence. Do we know if Sloan saw her recently? We got a ping from his practice showing 2 visits under her insurance. The first was just before her leave started. The second was a follow-up 6 weeks later. Both were coded as reproductive wellness checkups. No indication of fertility treatment, no note about embryo implantation. But if she was implanted without knowing or under vague consent terms. Kim trailed off, horror dawning in her eyes. That's trafficking, Reyes finished. Biological material used without consent, pregnancy orchestrated without full disclosure. We don't know if she knew Kim said, though her voice betrayed doubt. Maybe she agreed to something and didn't realize what it entailed. Or maybe Reyes said she was told it was her embryo. Is that even legal? Not really. But in the gaps between regulations, especially at a shutdown clinic using gray market transfer hours, people have gotten away with worse. They both stared at the timeline. On it, 3 names: Marissa Tran, Dr. Leonard Sloan, and the defunct Hope Fertility, now tightly connected. Reyes called the state licensing board and requested all historical procedure records tied to Dr. Sloan over the past year, especially anything involving embryo transfer or artificial insemination. It would take time. Meanwhile, he drafted an affidavit for a search warrant of Sloan's clinic. He didn't know exactly what they were going to find, but every instinct told him something had gone terribly wrong there. Back in Minneapolis, Daniel and Olivia Pierce had already retained an attorney. The moment Reyes had revealed Marissa's potential connection to their biological child, they knew this was no accident. Olivia had barely spoken since the call. Daniel had taken to pacing the living room at night, rage simmering beneath the surface. He wanted to know who made the decision, who chose to take their embryos, who carried them, who let their daughter end up wrapped in a hoodie in a public restroom, who decided their parenthood didn't matter. When Reyes called to update them on Dr. Sloan's involvement, Olivia didn't say anything for a full 30 seconds. Then quietly, "That's the name. I remember that name. He was in the room once, just once. Said something about how he'd personally reviewed our embryo quality. He smiled like he was doing us a favor." "Do you want to press charges?" Reyes asked. "If we can prove he took your embryos and transferred them to someone else, we want to know where our daughter came from," Olivia said, her voice flat. "And we want to make sure no one else ever goes through this." It took another 2 days before the warrant for Dr. Leonard Sloan's clinic was approved and executed. Officer Reyes accompanied the search team himself, unwilling to let this part of the investigation fall into bureaucratic limbo. The clinic was modest, clean, professional on the surface, tucked in a quiet Albany strip mall between a dental office and a Pilates studio. Inside, receptionists scattered as agents from the Medical Fraud Task Force and NYPD stepped inside with clipboards and gloves. The records room, tucked in the back of the office, was Reyes's priority. He began scanning physical files, many handwritten, looking for anything that connected Marissa Tran directly to reproductive procedures. He wasn't the only one. A parallel team interviewed staff and pulled hard drives from the central EMR system. The most unexpected break came from a former part-time nurse named Ellen Moore, now in her 50s, who had continued working shifts at the clinic long after Dr. Sloan took over full control post-Hope Fertility. She didn't seem surprised when they asked about Marissa. She was one of his quiet patients, Ellen said with a sigh. Came in for something he called ovarian tissue support. He said it was a protocol for women who'd had hormonal disruptions but wanted to preserve future fertility. Was she told anything about implantation, Reyes asked. No, I helped prep her one day. He said we were just administering hormone injections, doing pelvic scans. Then 2 weeks later she came in again for something listed as follow-up transfer support. I didn't question it at the time. I wish I had. Reyes leaned forward. Do you believe she knew she was being implanted with a donor embryo? I don't think so, Ellen said carefully. She was nervous, but she thought this was about stabilizing her own reproductive system. He told her that part of the treatment involved reintegrating her own preserved tissue. She signed something, but it wasn't a full consent packet, and it didn't name any genetic source. No informed consent, Reyes murmured. None that I saw, Ellen confirmed. That meant Marissa had undergone a covert implantation disguised as a therapeutic procedure. The embryo she'd carried was not her own, and she never knew. Hours later, another team executed a search at Marissa's apartment under a sealed judicial order. She hadn't returned since the baby was discovered, and her phone had been off ever since. The place was small but organized studio layout, plain furnishings, a half-eaten bag of almonds on the counter. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender. Kim found the journal in a drawer under the bed, handwritten, wrapped in a rubber band, pages curling with age and moisture. There were no dates, but the entries tracked the emotional disintegration of someone spiraling inward. Kim flipped through and read aloud to Reyes once they regrouped. "Listen to this. I wake up every morning and don't recognize my body. My stomach is not mine. Something is growing and I don't know where it came from. Dr. S. says it's all part of the reset, but it feels wrong." She turned to the page. "Sometimes I think about disappearing. Maybe if I leave, the feeling will go away. I can't connect to it. I try, but it kicks and moves and feels like an alien. It's not mine. I didn't ask for this." Kim's voice dropped. "Here's the worst part. I thought about leaving it in a hospital, but that felt cruel. I don't want it to suffer. I want it to be found, but not by me. I want it to have a chance, even if I can't give it that. I just want it to stop." Reyes sat very still. The words weren't those of someone evil. They were the unraveling thoughts of a person caught in something she hadn't fully agreed to, possibly hadn't even understood. She was never told, Kim said, and by the time her body told her the truth, it was too late to make peace with it. "So she chose to survive it," Reyes said. "Barely. And she tried in her way to give the child a better ending than what she was handed. It doesn't make what she did right," Kim added, "but it explains it. It also implicates Sloan on a whole new level." Reyes picked up the journal and stared at the last page. There, in uneven handwriting, were 5 words that lingered longer than anything else. "It wasn't mine. I'm sorry," Reyes called Olivia Pierce later that night. He read her parts of the journal gently, selectively, enough to help her understand how the woman who carried their child had experienced the pregnancy. Olivia cried quietly. "I don't know what to feel," she said. Hurt, angry, sad for her and for the baby. "You don't have to decide yet," Reyes said. "We're still connecting the pieces. Was the pregnancy healthy from what we can tell? Yes. No recorded complications, and the baby was born full term. But she was likely unmonitored for most of it. That's risky, especially with first-time mothers." "She didn't see it through choice," Olivia whispered. "She saw it through fear." Reyes didn't respond. He looked again at the now labeled evidence bag containing the journal. The truth wasn't blurry anymore. Marissa had carried the Pierce child believing it was some kind of medical maintenance. She hadn't signed a clear contract. She hadn't received standard prenatal care. And when she gave birth alone, she chose abandonment over acknowledgement, not because she didn't care, but because she was broken. The envelope arrived by overnight courier, sealed with a chain of custody sticker, and the official logo of the New York State Forensic Laboratory. Daniel Pierce held it in his hands longer than he meant to, staring at the printed name on the front, his own, typed in formal black ink, as if the words themselves carried some irreversible weight. Olivia stood beside him at the kitchen counter, her arms crossed over her chest face, unreadable. "Open it," she said softly. "We need to know." Daniel nodded carefully toward the adhesive strip and slid out the document. The paper inside was stiff and crisp. Across the top, a header read, "Confirmatory DNA Report, Parental Matching Analysis." Beneath it, rows of numbers and markers aligned in near-perfect columns. The conclusion was printed in bold based on the DNA samples provided. There is a 99.9997% probability that Daniel Pierce and Olivia Pierce are the biological parents of the subject, referred to as Infant Doe. NYPD Case 471A. Olivia exhaled so sharply it was almost a sob. She turned away, one hand over her mouth. Daniel didn't move. He read the paragraph 3 times, each repetition failing to soften its impact. "She's ours." He finally said the word slow, almost disbelieving. "She's actually ours." Olivia faced him again, her eyes full of something complicated: relief, confusion, wonder, fear. "All these years," she whispered. All this time we thought she never existed, that there was nothing left of us, and she's been out there, alone. Not alone, Daniel said quietly. She was found. She survived. Somehow. He set the paper down and sat heavily in a chair, head in his hands. I don't know whether to be grateful or furious. Both, Olivia said. Absolutely both. Reyes called them an hour later to walk through the next steps. The child is still under state protection, he explained, but now that biological connection has been established, you're within your rights to file for immediate custody. We'll fast-track the legal process with family court. What's her condition? Daniel asked. Is she okay? Stable Reyes said. She's gained weight, no signs of withdrawal or neglect. But she spent most of her life in an ICU. She needs continued care physically and emotionally. Olivia nodded, though Reyes couldn't see it. We'll be there. We'll do everything. Just tell us where she is. Later that evening, as Olivia packed a small bag with essentials for their emergency trip to New York, Daniel stood in the hallway staring at an old file box labeled Hope Fertility 2017. Inside were medical statements, clinic brochures, copies of complaint letters, and a folder marked Legal Closed. He pulled it out and flipped through. 5 years earlier, he had filed a civil suit against the clinic after their final IVF cycle was declared a failure under what he believed were suspicious circumstances. Embryo degradation was the term used in the clinic's statement. Daniel had suspected foul play. The timelines didn't make sense, the lab communication had been evasive, and no raw reports were ever provided. But their attorney had warned him it would be nearly impossible to prove misconduct unless they had direct evidence, something no one had, not even after the clinic was shut down. He'd watched the lawsuit dissolve under procedural motions and vague legal protections. The case was dismissed within 4 months. Olivia had begged him to let it go. Now he reopened the file with shaking hands, and for the first time in years the fury he'd tried to bury came flooding back. They stole her from us, he said aloud. They took her, lied to us, erased her, and she ended up in a bathroom stall. Olivia appeared behind him. That clinic's gone, Daniel. The people who did this may never see jail. Then I want their names. He said, teeth clenched. Every single one of them who touched our embryos, who touched that file, who signed off on the lies. I want them exposed. I want them shut down. I want them to never touch another family again. We need to focus on her first, Olivia reminded him gently. We have a daughter now. That's the only thing that matters. He looked at her, and for the first time since they received the call from NYPD, his face cracked, not with rage, but with something close to awe. She's ours, he said again. We didn't lose everything. No, Olivia whispered, we didn't. Back in New York, Reyes hung up the phone and returned to his desk. The case file had grown into a monster, over 200 pages of statements, medical records, subpoenas, digital traces, and court transcripts. But the truth was no longer fragmented. The baby found at JFK was the biological daughter of Olivia and Daniel Pierce, the result of a years-old medical violation buried in bureaucracy and greed. And while the law might take years to catch up with what had happened, a different kind of justice was beginning to unfold, one measured not in trials or settlements, but in the return of something thought lost. Reyes picked up a photograph from the evidence table, Jane Doe, now renamed in his report as Infant Pierce. Her eyes, dark and alert, seemed to look straight through him. He wondered what kind of life she would have now, who she would become. The story broke at dawn on a Thursday, triggered by a leak from within the precinct, though no one would admit who let it slip. The first headline appeared in a local New York City paper under the Health and Human Interest section. Abandoned infant at JFK identified as missing IVF embryo from Minnesota couple. Within hours, larger outlets picked it up. By noon, it was national. By evening, international. The details were too strange, too tragic, and too hauntingly plausible to ignore. A couple misled into believing their embryos were lost. A defunct fertility clinic with a suspicious past. A baby left in a public bathroom discovered seconds before death. And tying all of it together, a K9 unit with an unusually sharp nose. Shadow, the Belgian Malinois, who had picked up the scent through a crack in the bathroom door and refused to move until his handler followed. Shadow became an icon overnight. Photos of him, brown eyes, sharp muzzle alert, circulated across media outlets with captions like, "The dog who found her" and "K9 hero uncovers medical scandal." Morning shows requested interviews with his handler, Officer Elena Mendez, who refused most. She only made one public statement. He didn't know what he was doing was extraordinary. He just knew something was wrong. By the weekend, the NYPD press office had to open a separate email line to handle requests specifically related to the Shadow case. At the same time, the State Attorney General's office reopened the Hope fertility files. Under public pressure and congressional inquiry threats, they began reviewing civil suits previously dismissed, including Daniel Pierce's original case. A new panel was convened to investigate how those suits had been systematically buried, how mismanagement, fraud, and possible trafficking were swept under the rug with language like inconclusive, insufficient evidence, and plaintiffs failed to meet burden of proof. Olivia Pierce's voice, once quiet and measured, now carried through news segments and live interviews. She spoke not as a victim, but as a mother of a child, found by chance, returned by miracle, and loved without question. "This isn't just our story," she told one anchor. "It's the story of how medicine lost its ethics, and how a system designed to protect families ended up erasing them." Daniel, by contrast, remained largely silent, though footage of him cradling the infant in his arms circulated widely. The photo went viral within a day, a man holding a newborn, swaddled in soft hospital linen, his eyes closed, his jaw clenched as if holding back years of unsaid pain. In the background, Shadow sat just out of focus, a silent sentinel. The emotional force of the story began to shift the legal tide. The reopened Hope fertility inquiry unearthed documents, previously sealed shipping records, undeclared embryo transfers, even internal emails suggesting financial incentives for preferred donors whose reproductive materials were routed toward third-party clients. Several former employees turned whistleblower. One testified under oath that the Pierce embryos had been flagged as non-viable at administrative request despite no scientific confirmation. The embryo, later used in Marissa Tran's pregnancy, was transferred out of system logs altogether. They deleted it from the database, the whistleblower said, like it never existed. In parallel, advocacy groups began calling for new federal standards for embryo handling and fertility transparency. The story had struck a chord with thousands of couples nationwide who had gone through IVF and suddenly questioned whether their embryos were ever truly lost. "How many of us were lied to?" one online forum asked. "How many of our children are out there?" Amid this swirl, Marissa Tran remained missing. Her face, too, made the rounds of headlines not as a criminal, but as a mystery. The woman who had carried a child she didn't ask for, given birth in silence, and walked away, leaving the door half open for a dog to find what others would have missed. A few voices criticized her. More defended her. The journal excerpts, selectively released by NYPD with Olivia's consent, humanized her to the public. She didn't abandon that baby because she was heartless, one op-ed argued. She did it because the system crushed her under silence. Meanwhile, Shadow was awarded a special citation by the mayor's office in a brief ceremony outside City Hall. Cameras clicked as he stood next to Officer Mendez's leash, taut metal hanging awkwardly from his collar. The mayor called him the first living being to recognize that this child's life mattered. The phrase stuck. By the next morning, First to Recognize Life was printed across T-shirts and charity banners for NICUs across the country. Reyes watched the ripple effect with quiet awe. He hadn't expected this. Not the attention, not the headlines, not the national reckoning. He just wanted to know the truth. Now, that truth was unspooling across the country in real time, and people were finally listening. The next call he received wasn't from a reporter or a lawyer. It was from someone at the Department of Health and Human Services requesting access to all case notes involving Hope Fertility and Dr. Sloan. "We believe this may have happened more than once," the official said. "And we think you've only uncovered the beginning." The courtroom was unusually quiet for a final adoption hearing, the kind that typically carried more celebration than solemnity. But today the room held its breath as the judge, an older woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, reviewed the final documents before her. On her left sat two attorneys representing the Pierce family. On her right, a social worker from the New York Department of Child Welfare. And in the center, between Olivia and Daniel Pierce, wrapped in a soft pink sweater and cradled close, was the child they had fought for legally, emotionally, and against all odds. The baby, now named Ava, gurgled lightly, unaware of the weight the moment carried. The judge looked up and addressed the courtroom. After thorough review of the biological findings, the circumstances of discovery, and the expressed consent of all governing agencies, this court recognizes Olivia and Daniel Pierce as the legal guardians and adoptive parents of the child known henceforth as Ava Pierce. Olivia covered her mouth, tears spilling quietly. Daniel simply bowed his head, pressing his lips to Ava's forehead. There were no cameras, no reporters, no bright lights, just a quiet moment of finality of something broken, finally made whole. What followed in the weeks to come was both unexpected and somehow exactly what Reyes had hoped for. Marissa Tran turned herself in. Accompanied by a public defender and a trauma counselor, she walked into the precinct one gray morning with a folded piece of paper in her hands. It was her signed testimony. She offered to testify in full against Dr. Leonard Sloan and any known accomplices in the Hope fertility chain. She spoke for 3 hours straight, calm, detailed, and heartbreakingly honest. She explained how she had been told she was undergoing a reproductive stabilization procedure, how she was given hormone therapy under vague terms, how she was never told about donor embryos, never warned of possible implantation, never asked for direct consent. She described the emotional dissonance, the fear, the sense of physical betrayal. And finally, the birth alone in a hotel room near JFK with no plan, no support, and a baby she didn't understand but couldn't bear to harm. I didn't leave her to die, she told the investigators. I left her where she could be found. Her testimony, combined with the reopened state files and whistleblower accounts, triggered a multi-state investigation. Dr. Sloan was arrested and charged with medical fraud, unauthorized use of genetic material, and conspiracy to defraud. 2 other staff from the original Hope Fertility Network were indicted as well. Civil lawsuits followed quickly, dozens of former patients coming forward, some questioning whether they too had been misled, others reporting similar oddities in their treatment. The case became a catalyst for sweeping reforms in reproductive ethics. Several fertility clinics across the country were audited. Consent laws were re-examined. For the first time in U.S. history, a formal panel was formed to oversee the ethical use of cryopreserved embryos, and Ava Pierce's story became a central reference point in every session. In Minneapolis, life began to settle into something new. Ava's room was a mixture of baby books, warm lighting, and little notes pinned to the wall. Olivia's affirmations, Daniel's to-do lists, medical updates. Shadow's photo hung on the corner of the crib, a small nod to the dog who had started it all. Every so often, Reyes would get a text and update from Olivia, a milestone photo, a short video of Ava's first laugh. He never responded with more than a smiley or a thumbs up, but he saved every single one. One afternoon, Daniel called him unexpectedly. "We'd like to visit," he said. "We want Ava to meet the dog who found her." When the visit finally happened, Shadow wagged his tail slowly as Ava, now 10 months old, reached out a tiny hand toward his fur. The touch was light, unsure, but Shadow stood still, eyes soft, posture relaxed. Mendez knelt beside him, whispering encouragement. Olivia smiled through tears. Daniel looked away, and for a brief, silent moment the child who had nearly been lost touched the nose of the dog who brought her back. If this story moved, you don't forget to like and subscribe for more deeply human, true-to-life narratives. What part of Ava's journey struck you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective.